I wanted to take a moment to read through a couple of the passages regarding Passover because it's coming up in 2 weeks. And I first wanted to read for you the little passage about the primary passage about Passover, which is in in Exodus chapter 12. So this is the first instance of Passover being mentioned in our Bibles. And so I'm going to read that for you now, and then we'll discuss a little bit as we go. So here's the inauguration of Passover. This is from Exodus chapter 12, starting right in verse 1. It says, Yah said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month is to be the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of your year. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, they must each select an animal of the flock according to their father's households, one animal per household. If the household is too small for a whole animal, that person and the neighbor nearest his house are to select one based on the combined number of people. You should apportion the animal according to what each person will eat. You must have an unblemished animal, a year-old male. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You are to keep it until the 14th day of this month. Then the whole assembly of the community of Israel will slaughter the animals at twilight. They must take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts of the lintel of the houses where they eat them. They are to eat the meat that night. They should eat it roasted over the fire along with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or cooked in boiling water, but only roasted over fire, its head as well as its legs and inner organs. Do not let any of it remain until morning. You must burn up any part of it that does remain before morning. Here is how you must eat it. You must be dressed for travel, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You are to eat it in a hurry. It is Yah's Passover. I will pass through the land of Egypt on that very night and strike every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. I am Yah. I will execute judgment, against all of the gods of Egypt. The blood on the houses where you are staying will be a distinguishing mark for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No plague will be among you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day is to be a memorial for you, and you must celebrate it as a festival to Yah. You are to celebrate it throughout your generations as a permanent statute. You must eat unleavened bread for 7 days. On the first day, you must remove yeast from your homes. Whoever eats what is leavened from the first day through the 7th day must be cut off from Israel. You are to hold a sacred assembly on the first day and another sacred assembly on the 7th day. No work may be done on those days except for preparing what people need to eat. You may do only that. You are to observe the festival of unleavened bread because on this very day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt. You must observe this day throughout your generations as a permanent statute. You are to eat unleavened bread in the first month from the evening of the 14th day of the month until the evening of the 21st day. Yeast or leaven must not be found in your houses for 7 days. If anyone eats something leavened, that person, whether a foreign resident or a native of the land, must be cut off from the community of Israel. Do not eat anything leavened. Eat unleavened bread in all your homes. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, Go, select an animal from the flock according to your families and slaughter the Passover animal. Take a cluster of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and brush the lintel and the 2 doorposts with some of the blood in the basin. None of you may go out of the door of his house until morning. When Yah passes through the land to strike Egypt and sees the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, he will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter your houses to strike you. Keep this command permanently as a statute for you and your descendants. When you enter the land that Yah will give you, as he promised, you are to observe this ritual. When your children ask you, what does this ritual mean to you? You are to reply, it is the Passover sacrifice to Yah, for he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians and spared our homes. So the people bowed down and worshipped. Then the Israelites went and did this. They did just as Yah had commanded Moses and Aaron. Now at midnight, Yah struck every firstborn male in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and every firstborn of the livestock. During the night, Pharaoh got up, he along with all of his officials and all the Egyptians, and there was a loud wailing throughout Egypt because there wasn't a house without someone dead. He summoned Moses and Aaron during the night and said, "Get up, leave my people, both you and the Israelites, and go worship Yah as you have asked. Take even your flock and your herds as you asked, and leave, and also bless me." Now the Egyptians pressured the people in order to send them quickly out of the country, for they said, "We're all going to die." So the people took their dough before it was leavened, with their kneading bowls wrapped up in their clothes on their shoulders. The Israelites acted on Moses' word and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And Yah gave the people such favor in the Egyptian sight that they gave them what they requested. In this way, they plundered the Egyptians. The Israelites traveled from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 soldiers on foot, besides their families. A mixed multitude also went up with them, along with a huge number of livestock, both flocks and herds. The people baked the dough they had brought out of Egypt into unleavened loaves, since it had no yeast. For when they had been driven out of Egypt, they could not delay and had not prepared any provisions for themselves. The time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that same day, all Yah's divisions went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of vigil in honor of Yah, because he would bring them out of the land of Egypt. This same night is in honor of Yah, a night vigil for all of the Israelites throughout their generations. Yah said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner may eat it, but any slave a man has purchased may eat it after you have circumcised him. A temporary resident or a hired hand may not eat the Passover. It is to be eaten in one house. You may not take any of the meat outside the house, and you may not break any of its bones. The whole community of Israel must celebrate it. If a foreign resident with you, and if a foreigner resides with you and wants to celebrate Yah's Passover, every male in his household must be circumcised, and then he may participate. He will become like a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person may eat of it. The same law will apply to both the native and the foreigner who resides among you." Then all the Israelites did this. They did just as Yah commanded Moses and Aaron. On that same day, Yah brought the Israelites out of the land of Egypt according to their divisions. So there is the inaugural event that shaped the narrative of Passover for everyone. So the question often for us is, well, how do we treat this? Is this, what parts of the initial do we adhere to and what parts do we not adhere to? Now we have a slightly different, slightly modified set of instructions that are given to us in Leviticus 23, and we also have another set of instructions in Deuteronomy 14, I believe it is, and I think I'll read those for you in a moment. But just off of the top of your head, and you can, if you want, fire up your cameras so that we can see each other in this meeting, because there's nobody here, and it would be delightful to see you. So just don't do anything distracting. Just don't pick your nose or whatever, but you can fire up your cameras if you want. So first of all, I just wanted to ask a question, and then we can have a discussion about this. I'd love to very much. What among those instructions that I just read to you do you see as not being totally applicable to you today? Are there any? What would you say? Who is it? Go for it.
Well, we don't have to slaughter the lamb today and put it on our doorposts.
Now, you said we don't have to. Would you care to rephrase that?
We shouldn't.
We are not allowed to. Yes, that is correct. We are not permitted to slaughter an animal today. Okay, good. What else you got? Anything else?
I'm not quite sure about the circumcision part of
Okay,
it.
circumcision. That's an interesting one. We'll have to discuss that a little bit. Anything else?
Well, our firstborns are not being killed either.
Okay, so there's no firstborns dying every year when you're doing Passover. That's true. Okay, anything else?
That's all I got.
Okay, what do you say, David?
I had just, man, this is all amazing stuff to me. I was meditating on a passage from Numbers, and it's Numbers chapter 9. It's like verses 9 through 11.
Okay,
And
just
and
summarize
then,
it. Summarize it for us. What does it say?
yeah, it's in the nature of keeping second Passover.
Okay, yes, gotcha.
Yeah, where it says that if you were in a journey, in verse 10, it says, speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any man of you or your posterity be unclean by reason of a dead body, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto the Lord the 14th day of the second month. So
Right.
my question was, are we on a sojourn far from the land?
That's a great question. That's an interesting question. I had not ever considered really like. I would say no. We're not really sojourning. We're exiled. So it's not like we're unclean because of a corpse, and it's not like we're on a long journey. We've been exiled from the land. So frankly, we have to kind of figure out. And this is something that we all have to figure out, because in these instructions, we have a certain series of instructions which cannot be repeated because it's only for the inaugural event. We have a second set of instructions and a third in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, which give us clearer instructions for how we're supposed to commemorate that inaugural event. But those instructions include some changes, like you cannot, the first time they could all slaughter their own animals, and that was like everybody had to do it at the same time between the evenings on the 14th day. But in the future, he says in the other instructions, and we'll read those in a moment, you may not do that. You have to take your lamb to the place where Yah designates to put his name. So that would be Shiloh with the tabernacle, and then the Jerusalem later on. But I think that we have to look at the fact that we are actually in exile, and it's instructive. It can be instructive and helpful to look at, how did the Jews interpret what are we supposed to do now that we don't have a temple? We're in exile in Babylon, for example. How are we going to observe the Passover? Well, that's where we get a lot of the traditions that we're dealing with today. And as I've always mentioned, traditions aren't always bad as long as you don't elevate them to a position of the Torah command. But also you have to be mindful of, does it somehow violate a different command? And some could. So I like the ideas that you guys are bringing forward. One thing that Cece did not mention is putting blood on your door. There's really no putting blood on your door these days. There's no destroyer coming over. So there are certain elements of that inaugural Passover event that just don't apply to us, and never applied to anyone after that inaugural event. So I think what makes sense is for us to read the actual instructions that Moses gave us so that we could inaugurate this event for every year thereafter. And so see if we can get some clarity about what that means for us. And then we'll talk about this from a practical standpoint of how are we supposed to do this, and also some spiritual interpretation in light of Yeshua, because Yeshua is the most important thing that we're really talking about here. He is our Passover lamb, and we're going to need to talk about that a little bit. So I'm sharing my screen with you now, And we're going to read these two passages from Leviticus and Deuteronomy. They are much shorter than the one I just read from Exodus, so fear not. I'm not going to read to you all night. Let's see what we got here. Here is from Leviticus 23:4, where it says, "These are Yah's appointed times, the sacred assemblies you are to proclaim at their appointed times. The Passover to Yah comes in the first month at twilight on the 14th day of the month. The festival of unleavened bread to Yah is on the 15th day of the same month. For 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the first day you are to hold a sacred assembly. You are not to do any regular work. You are to present a fire offering to Yah for 7 days. On the seventh day there will be a sacred assembly. You must not do any regular work." That is the passage from Leviticus. Here's the one from Deuteronomy 16. I apologize, I misquoted that previously. In Deuteronomy 16, it says, "Observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover to Yah your Elohim, because Yah your Elohim brought you out of Egypt by night in the month of Aviv. Sacrifice to Yah your Elohim a Passover animal from the herd or the flock in the place where Yah chooses to have his name dwell. You must not eat leavened bread with it. For 7 days you are to eat unleavened bread with it, the bread of hardship, because you left the land of Egypt in a hurry, so that you may remember for the rest of your life the day you left the land of Egypt. No yeast is to be found anywhere in your territory for 7 days, and none of the meat you sacrifice in the evening of the first day is to remain until morning. You are not to sacrifice the Passover animal in any of the towns that Yah your Elohim is giving you. You must only sacrifice the Passover animal at the place where Yah your Elohim chooses to have his name dwell. Do this in the evening as the sun sets at the same time of day you departed from Egypt. You are to cook and eat it in the place Yah your Elohim chooses, and you are to return to your tents in the morning. You must eat unleavened bread for 6 days. On the seventh day there is to be a solemn assembly to Yah your Elohim, and you must not do any work." So those are the two passages. There's some additional passages that are on your screen now. This is from Numbers 9 and 14. That's the one that David was mentioning earlier about the second Passover. We have Numbers 28, which includes the daily fire offerings, that you notice that they were referenced there. We have a passage in Joshua 5 that talks about the generation that went into the promised land, their first Passover in the land of Canaan. And then in Ezra, the exiles return from Babylon and observe Passover themselves. So those are some additional key passages that will be instructive for you. So the key questions that we really want to focus on are what parts apply to us today, what parts are absolutely clear, and which ones are a little bit hazy. And are there any parts that are temporary, that would not be something that we would need to continue to do over and over and over? So we talked about, putting blood on the door. I think that's one of those parts that was temporary. Everyone's sacrificing their own animal and roasting it over a fire and sharing it with their immediate neighbor. That would be temporary. What about what about parts that apply to us today and parts that are absolutely clear and which ones are a little bit hazy? That's what we really need to focus on, is what do we need to do today? Now, I want to start with the really basic and practical. David, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking of his words in John chapter 10 where he says, "I am the door." Have we already put blood on the door?
Right.
Once and for all.
That's a good insight. Good insight. So I think what we need to consider is what is required of us today. Let's deal with that first. So first of all, how about leaven? Leaven is something that we need to discuss because, and we've discussed this many times, it's good for me to remind you. I think Paul said that once. Even though I'm saying the same thing to you, it's good for you and it's good for me. I don't know if you're like me, but you probably are, where I do need to continuously refresh myself regarding some of these commands of observing the feasts, because they're not like they're complicated or something, but I just need a refresher every year, and that's why it's good that we're actually talking about this, in the couple of weeks leading up to Passover, so that we can remind ourselves, what is it that we're actually supposed to be doing and what is it that we're not supposed to be doing. So let's talk about the really basic and practical. You leaven. Okay, we're not going to go into the spiritual aspects of leaven. Let's talk about the physical aspects of leaven for right now. Is this the festival of unleavened toothpaste? Is this the festival of unleavened kitty litter? Because there is leavening agents in a lot of different stuff. And I'm not going to suggest to you that you are right or wrong regarding whether you think you should remove every single kind of leaven from your home during Passover. Because in the ancient world, what did they know of as leaven? What would leaven mean to them? And remember that we're all about, as Hebrew roots people, figuring out what does it mean in the historical and cultural context of the people who received it. So if you had to answer that question to the historical facts of the time and the people that the information was given to, what is leaven to them? Anyone may raise their hand and give me your opinion. It's Cecile. Cece, what's up?
In the ancient time, I would just say leaven was anything that was bread.
Well, a specific kind of bread. Yeah.
Bread that rose, like it had the white rice and the and whatever that dish was that they would make the bread in. So it was the process of making the bread, which was often the result of why they had to flee Egypt so soon, is because that bread did not have time to rise in the dough.
So I think it's worth mentioning that in the ancient world, yeast is sourdough yeast. If any of you ladies out there who have made your own sourdough bread, you know that you mix some of this fermented, musty smelling, sticky gunk. You put it into your stuff and it leavens it. It infiltrates it. It makes it rise. It makes it puff. There's some wonderful spiritual lessons there. But in the ancient world, and the viewers and the readers of this context, they're going to be thinking of not all of these weird things that we have changed it to understand. Our understanding has changed to a fermentation. Because of our science, we kind of think about fermentation. And now you've introduced a whole lot of different stuff, because there are fermenting agents in all kinds of stuff. And people do go down the rabbit hole of trying to find everything in their house that is has some type of a leavening agent in it. And that can be severely restricting. You can remove a lot of stuff from your house. But I think it's worth kind of thinking about this from a historical perspective, because to them, that would have been any kind of puffy bread. Any bread that had yeast put in it, sourdough starter, to make it rise. I mean, you got to remember that these people took this unleavened bread and put it in their kneading bowls on their backs, and they ate it for at least the first 7 days. Now, if any of you who have done any research on this at all know that yeast is kind of like in the environment. So this bread that they put on their back, even though there wasn't any sourdough added to it, it would have started to rise over that 7-day period of time. But it still would have been considered it would still be what we consider flat bread, not a puffy bread. Hayden, did you have a question? I don't have a microphone for you, so if you want to just come over and come close to me and make your comment.
I was just going to say, these kneading bowls, they didn't really, at least in our country when it was founded, they didn't clean them really. So when you put the dough in it, it rises. Get up, butt crack of dawn, put the dough in it. A couple hours later, you come back, it's risen. That leaven to them probably meant the bread that is rising or has risen or rose when you cook it, and the bowl. This before germ theory, this bowl that when you put the bread in, it just gets bigger, right?
Yeah.
Because they weren't cleaning them. It had the old dough still in it, or they understood that there was something special about that leavened dough, and they would like leave a little bit of it and like put it in, and then just stack on the rest. So you're kind of leaving a little for yourself.
Yep, that's a good way to look at it. So ideally, you'd be looking at leaven from the historical and the cultural perspective of we're not eating any bread that is, donuts, loaves of bread. You've seen matzah that is, created by our Hebrew brothers. Make little flat crackers with holes in them, and they have stripes on them, and that's totally good. That's totally legit. But some of you make your own unleavened bread. It's just flat bread. So I don't want anybody to, go too far down the rabbit hole in this, but if you feel convicted about it and you want to remove the toothpaste and the this and the that and the other, anything in your house that contains leaven, you should absolutely do that. That your conscience will be your guide in that regard. But I think it makes sense to kind of look at it from a historical perspective. And I think David and then Tracy has a comment.
Yeah, I'll be brief. You used the word puffed up, right? And so there's a connotation in some Hebrew thought that removing leaven had to do with removing pride.
Yes.
That you were, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. Keep going.
No, I was just saying it's to approach it with, I don't know, I imagine we all get a bit puffed up at times, probably. Right.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent insight. And pride and puffing up is definitely, I think, a spiritual imagery that is definitely to be included here. What do you say, Tracy? What's on your heart?
I was just thinking about how most of us started our journey when we started learning about the feasts and getting the leaven out of our house, and we kind of went crazy with, and some people still do. I'm not saying going crazy is not the right word. It's a passion. It's a passion.
It is a passion. Because, you're right.
Yeah, because you hear this word and you're like, oh my gosh, I got to get everything out of here. Because it mirrors that spiritual nature of how you recognize I've got a lot of false doctrine in me. I've got a lot of sin in me. I got to get rid of this stuff. Everything's pagan, and you start doing everything to the extreme.
Yeah.
And then you kind of, as you learn and grow, you're like, okay, I understand what this means now. And you kind of calm down a little bit. Also reminded me of when Messiah was washing Peter's feet. He says this word to him, and Peter hears it, and it's like, well, not just my feet, my head, my whole body, wash me.
Right.
So it kind of reminds me of that, and like how, we got into a little better understanding of what leaven truly is and the spiritual meaning, and why, the feeding of the sourdough starter and all that stuff. So yeah. I just thought that was a neat thought.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a good insight. And I think that it's a really wonderful idea that Tracy introduced, that we often start off incredibly zealous, and we want to incorporate anything that we can find and get really excited about it and do everything that we can that feels right. And there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't always have the best wisdom attached to it, but there's zeal. Zeal is good, but zeal does need to be tempered by some wisdom. And it's very akin to Paul talking about meat sacrificed to idols in the Corinthian letters, where he says, those who are weak in the faith and are not yet mature would have a stumbling block placed before them regarding eating meat sacrificed to idols. But for somebody who's more mature and they have kind of grown up in their faith a little bit, they're like, yeah, who cares? There's no other gods but Yah. So I can eat meat that was offered to anything. I don't really care. There's only one God. But those who have that more mature level of faith are not to judge those who are not at that maturity level, and vice versa. That those who are zealous and at the beginning of their journey and are feeling really zealous about having, removing every single tiny hint of leavening agent, fermenting agent, baking soda, whatever it is that you're on the hunt for. Don't be judgmental against those who have decided, okay, we don't need to go that crazy. We need to be tolerant of each other, because this is one of those areas where it's like, hey, you're supposed to remove the leaven from your home. We just need to define what leaven is. And I think the best example is to see, what is the historical and cultural context of leaven for the people who read this book. Yes, sir. Ma'am, who is it? It's Angela. What's up, Angela?
He says to remove the leaven from your home, not your neighbor.
Oh, Angela pointed out, it says to remove the leaven from your home, not your neighbor's. It's a good insight, Angela. Her brain is working, so good for her. I love that lady. She's such a wonderful lady. So there's one issue is, yes, you do want to remove leaven. And I mentioned last week when we got together, I said, hey, if you are one of these ladies who has a bunch of food stored up in your freezer outside and you're on the hunt for leaven, let's start cooking that stuff. Get that out of your house. Get it ready to get out of your house because you don't want to be throwing away food. There ain't no sense in doing that. Start cooking that stuff with leaven in it. Start cooking all your frozen loaves of bread, whatever you've got. Start cooking it. Start making it. You got 2 weeks to use it all up. I don't like to have any leaven in my house. We're getting rid of anything that has leaven, especially in relation to bread. If it's any kind of a breading product on something that has leaven in it, I'm going to get rid of it and we're going to eat. Now, the second, another question that comes up that people often have questions about is, am I required to not eat leavened bread or am I required to eat unleavened bread? How do you read that text? What is your opinion? Because it does seem to suggest, I'm not making an authoritative judgment on this, but it does seem to suggest that you are to eat unleavened bread as a reminder of the fact that this is the bread of affliction when we left Egypt. What do you say about that?
Alan, did you lose sound? Or did I lose sound?
Yeah, I couldn't hear anything either. It's his end.
Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Thanks, Tracy. I can hear you a little better now.
Okay, one sec. I think I just need to adjust something here. I apologize. Check, 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 check. Is that better?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I had a little issue. Okay, I'm back. So David was going to say something, but he couldn't seem to get himself on. Does anybody else have a...
Oh, no. I was waiting for you to acknowledge.
Thank you. I apologize, David. I'm so sorry.
I was just going to say, if you've ever had matzah, I can't have matzah without looking at it and seeing him, right? It's got the perforations, the stripes, right? It does remind me of him. So I tend to, I buy extra leaven or unleavened bread, matzah, and then I try to eat it all week. And by the way, I really like it. So it's not.
Yeah, it's not bad.
It's nothing crazy.
Sure. So David, do you think that, do you interpret the scripture to suggest that you might need to eat unleavened bread, or do you think it's a suggestion or it's optional?
I don't see it as burdensome. How's that?
Okay.
I see it as, I'm kind of like you. I think, like I tell my family, hey, if you've got loaves of bread or something, finish it up before we get to Passover, because I want to honor it in spirit, right? I don't go around sweeping for crumbs or anything like that, but we do try to clear out the house of leavened bread, for that week.
Good deal. Tracy?
I think it's clear that we're supposed to eat unleavened bread by the command. How I read it, it says 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. And so I think that was something I didn't catch when I first started observing it. I just saw that don't eat leavened, but I didn't catch but you also must eat unleavened, because I think that's very significant to what we're supposed to be taking in, undefiled word. And we ourselves are unleavened, as Paul says. So
100%.
I think it's significant.
I tend to agree with you, Tracy. I think that it's an accurate reading of that, and I think that there is a spiritual symbolism that is attached that we're supposed to get from eating unleavened bread. The bread of affliction, the unleavened part, where we're supposed to be unleavened spiritually. There's so many good lessons that come from that, and I know that it's not expensive, and I think that bread. There's a reason that Yah had specific instructions regarding bread, because in the ancient world and even today, bread is a staple. Grains of some kind made into some type of bread is a staple everywhere on this planet. It is hard. Those of you who are gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive or whatever know that it's hard to eat. It's hard to eat, period, if you are allergic to gluten, because gluten, bread, yeast, grains are in everything that we eat. It's a staple of diets everywhere around the world. So, it's hard to get away from. And so if you're going to eat bread, in which you probably are, I like having some type of bread in every meal that I eat. I don't care what it is. I just like having some bread. So make it leavened bread or unleavened bread. I think that's a good basic strategy there. If you can't and you are gluten intolerant or whatever, they make gluten-free matzah, right, Tracy? I think Tracy actually made some a couple of years ago, and it was quite good.
I will disagree with your statement about it's not expensive if you buy gluten-free matzah.
Okay, sorry.
It's like $11 a box.
How about making it though?
Making it is not expensive, other than the, gluten-free ingredients are always more expensive, but it's better to make it.
Yeah, understood. And I think if any of you have ever tried a gluten-free or even just make your own matzah at home, everybody who's ever made any, for me, it was way better than the stuff you buy in the box with the stripes and the piercings. And I appreciate, David, what you were talking about with the visual representation of how the Jews have made this bread forever. But homemade matzah can be quite tasty. You put a little seasoning in there, it's fantastic. But anyway, I digress. The next idea that we had here, and this is something that we often don't really want to talk about, and that is circumcision. You have to look at it spiritually and you have to look at it physically. How do you interpret that? And I'll ask David, Cece, or Tracy, because I'm anticipating that those are the only three people who are going to talk this evening. Any of you other people can pipe in at any time, by the way. But I'd like to know your thoughts on this circumcision thing, because it's pretty clear to me that no person who is uncircumcised may partake of the Passover. Now, you're going to have to determine whether that's literal or whether that's spiritual circumcision. Now, I'm not going to say anything else. Tracy, is your hand up for a reason, or is it stuck up?
I'm stuck up.
Okay, so anybody regarding the circumcision issue?
The only thing I would say is, as a person who is circumcised, is that I don't think it's really about that. I think it's about your heart, right? It's about circumcised. Granted me a new heart that I would not sin against you, right? He's going to grant me a fleshly heart, right? Instead of a stony heart, right? I think it's more spiritual than maybe. I'm sure in those days it was very physical. But I think today it's more spiritual. Okay, that's my take on it.
I'm glad that you brought that up and kind of phrased it in that way, David. What do you say, Angela?
Did the mixed multitude have to get circumcised that night?
No. So those instructions. Angela asked a great question. Did the mixed multitude have to get circumcised that night in order to partake of this Passover, the first Passover? No. If you'll notice in the text, it says after the event that Moses and Aaron received instructions from Yah for the further observation of it. But there was no circumcision offered at the very first one for the mixed multitude.
No one could leave the next day if that happened.
Yeah, no one would be leaving the next day if that happened. That'd be tough to walk. So I think that brings forward a spiritual principle that someone who is looking around them in Egypt and has previous to this time period worshipped foreign gods and has seen what has happened with the Israelites and Moses, their prophet, and Egypt, and everybody's going, I think that this God of the Hebrews is really powerful, and he's obviously way more powerful than any of the gods we've been worshiping. I think that I would rather be attached to him. That to me says that that's a circumcised heart. That is a change in perspective from a person saying, I think that God is the God I want to worship. The heart has changed. And so that is a spiritual circumcision of a sort. And so it would be permissible for them to eat the Passover on that first occasion. But with the instructions going forward, it's saying literally, be circumcised. But then that's going to bring in some contentious issues. And it becomes very contentious in the New Testament. David and then Cece?
The one thing that comes to mind, since you kind of phrased it that way, was it could be speaking of a future event. Because if you look at when Yehoshua, kind of an homage to the Father and the Son, leads them into the Promised Land, what's the first thing they do in the Promised Land?
They
get circumcised. Yeah.
Well, because they were traveling for 40 years, probably didn't know when they were going to be taken. You don't want to be getting circumcised when
this was a new. It was a new generation. The wilderness generation had passed away. This new generation that is led into the Promised Land is then circumcised.
Right.
So that could kind of hint at a future. When he leads us into the millennial kingdom, that we'll all receive that new fleshly heart.
And maybe. I think that's a good insight. And Angela asked, did they? I'm coming to you in just a sec, Cece. Angela ask, did they actually, get circumcised in the wilderness? No. Did they actually partake of the feasts in the wilderness? And most Bible commentators, including the rabbis, say no. They did not observe the feasts in the wilderness because it was probably very impractical to do so. But I don't know whether that's true or not. We'd have to think about it. Cece, what's up? It's your turn to speak. What do you got?
I think it may be both, but the problem with it being both is that in today's time, we're not under the rule of God. And
Whoa. Hold on a second. What did you just say?
Both, because even in the Old Testament, even in the law, God commands us to circumcise our heart. So I know a lot of people think that that's new, but it's not. It has always been a commandment for us to circumcise our heart.
Right.
But we're not under God's rule. We're not in Jerusalem or under a temple. So it'd be hard to tell a foreigner or a Gentile, like, yep, come on over here. You're going to get circumcised.
Right. No, I totally understand.
I don't think we would know what we were doing in that point. I mean, yeah, we can go to a doctor and have the doctor circumcise men or whatever that personal thing is. I don't really want to imagine it, but I just don't think we're under the rule to command that. But in that time, I do think it was both.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, Tracy.
We always joke around this time that, when we observe Passover, we don't have a circumcision inspector. So the way that God's word has always been intended is that it would be appealing to the inner man first, the inside and then out. And I think it was Angela that brought up the point. I think it's a really good point that the foreigners were not expected to circumcise themselves at that point. And even Abraham was called first before given that covenant of circumcision. So just applying that to, our covenant that we're making with Messiah, when we invite people to the Passover, we make it very clear that this is a covenantal meal, and that if you are not currently or willing to dedicate your life and enter into this covenant, and we stress the seriousness and the significance of it, even during the Passover meal that we do, quoting Paul, like, you don't want to eat of this unworthily, because it is the most serious covenant. So we don't just invite anybody to it. We only invite people who are professing circumcision of the heart. And, on the other feast days, yeah, come one, come all, enjoy the feast and learn of God, but that one is special and set apart.
100%. That I agree with you 100% that, and we have talked about that many times over the years for our Passovers. It's like, this is not a free for all where anybody should come. It's not some, a spectator sport where you want to come and check it out. Oh, this is cool. We're going to check out this weird cultural anomaly that these people are doing over here. No, that's not appropriate at all. This is a covenantal meal. And I think that Tracy and Cece and David kind of mentioned the idea that the spiritual comes first and that the spiritual informs the physical. And so how I would interpret that, and some of you may disagree with me about this, and that's okay, but I'm going to say it anyway. I believe that your circumcision of heart is absolutely critical and mandatory for you to have any kind of a relationship with God, let alone get involved in a Passover observant, a ritual Passover meal that is a celebration and reaffirming of the vows of this covenant, so to speak. But I do believe that the challenge that you're going to face if you say that circumcision is to only be interpreted physically is that is a slippery slope. Because you could very potentially you're likely to start approaching all kinds of commandments in that way and say, well, it's spiritual and it doesn't need to be physically, it doesn't need to be literally followed, because that's how many of our brethren went astray for many, many generations of casting the words of Yah to the side by saying, well, it's all spiritual now. We don't need to observe this Sabbath day because Yeshua is our Sabbath rest, and we don't need to literally observe Sabbath. That you can and probably will get yourself in all kinds of trouble if you start to spiritualize these commandments to the exclusion of the physical. So I personally believe that when you want to watch this, Hayden? When Paul is talking to his people that he's writing to about having, I apologize, I lost my train of thought. When you have the issue of circumcision to Paul and the first century people was a very contentious one, as you know. But that the Jews were coming forward and saying, you must be circumcised according to the tradition of Moses, which I interpret to be according to our tradition of how we do things, or you cannot be saved. That is a false statement. That is absolutely a false statement. But that doesn't mean, it's exactly akin to the instructions that were given in Acts chapter 15, which is like, hey, here's these 4 things that you need to do. Because Moses is taught in the synagogue every Sabbath day. That literally leads me to believe, and any thinking person to believe, that when you go and listen to Moses taught in the synagogue on the Sabbath day every Saturday for the rest of your life, you're going to learn a whole lot more than just those 4 commands. So we got to start somewhere. And I think that starting with a spiritually circumcised heart is and should lead to a physical circumcision. Just like you should literally, my rule for following the commands of Yah is always this. If I can literally do it, I must. If I am not permitted to do it, I must not. That's the way I look at it. Because it says, you're supposed to do this. Well, I can't do that because I don't have a temple. I'm not going to do it. But if I can literally do it, I'm going to do it eventually. Now, you may start with just the first 4 commands, or you may start with a spirituals, my heart is circumcised, but I'm not going to get physically circumcised. I understand that that's where a lot of people will start, but I've known some people who are like, yeah, I started that way, but I really realized that I do need to physically, literally observe these commands, and they did end up getting a physical circumcision. I think that's the biblical way to follow. Anyone care to comment on that? I know it's a contentious issue and I don't want it to take up too much time, but I do want us to just recognize that we can't just spiritualize the commands and not do them literally. That's my premise. Anyone care to agree or disagree?
I agree.
Cadence agrees. Cece, what's up?
I guess my issue for the physical in this day of time is who would do that? You know, like who do you go to for that? Like obviously you can go to a doctor,
Yeah.
but do we trust any doctor with the man who is in covenant with God to perform such a religious covenant thing? I think that
Yeah.
was the biggest issue for me. I mean, obviously we know it was important because Moses he had to get circumcised before he even went to go get the
Right.
people of Israel.
Right.
But again, it draws back around to we're not in Israel. We're not under that rule. We're not under that, like, we're in Rome. We're under Rome law. So what doctor will
So
we
you-
trust to do that?
Yeah, so here's the instructions in the Torah. It just says you must be circumcised, and the rule generally was after they came out of Egypt that you must circumcise your children on the 8th day. It doesn't say who's going to do it, how they're going to do it. It just says when to do it. So who you have do it is immaterial. It doesn't matter. Now, if you're a Jew, then you got a special person who's designated to do this, and it's a religious, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter to me because God doesn't give us instructions about who's supposed to do it and how they're supposed to do it. That's not the important part.
When he said you, he meant you, who was now in that covenant, in that Hebrew covenant, right? And so I imagine when God said, you shall circumcise your your children, and you shall be circumcised, they were now in a covenant camp. Otherwise, why couldn't they be circumcised in Egypt? Like I think who does it and what circumstances you do that in is just as important as doing it.
Okay, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I'm simply saying that I believe that you probably should seek to do any command that the Bible tells you to do. You should literally seek to do it and seek for the spiritual significance in order to accomplish that primarily, really. But I think that we should not, under any circumstance, neglect the physical part of a command and interpret it spiritually only. Because you've mentioned a couple of times, Cece, that you used a phrase that was like, we're not under that thing. But I think that the text that we just read kind of says that we are, because it says these are the rules for any Israelite and native who's visiting, any foreigner who wants to attach himself to Yah. There is one rule, one set of rules for anybody, whether they're native born or a foreigner resident who wants to join the group. So I think that those rules do apply to everyone. Yes,
I
ma'am.
agree. I think they apply, but I think when we look at even when Daniel had to walk, when they're in different times and when they're in different when they're enslaved by different people like Babylon, certain things they just couldn't do, like they would
100%.
follow, you know what I mean? So I think, like,
Absolutely.
what if your doctor is a witch and you don't know?
Yeah.
You're doing this ritual on you.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. So you're right. There does need to be some consideration for how we're going to do it. I would not circumcise my own children because I don't know. Could you kill them? I don't think so. I'd probably mess it up though, but I would probably go to a doctor. Or who knows? I don't really know that much about it. Angela, you were going to say something, and then Tracy. You done?
Yeah.
Okay, Tracy, I apologize. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think Cece brings up a really good point about, how we do these things. And it kind of goes along with so many of other things that we just do the best that we can, best of our ability, because we don't really know how it's prescribed, and being cautious in how we do these things too. But I pondered that as well. Like, other people might know better than me, is the Jewish way of circumcising different than the way they would do it at the hospital? Like, I've heard it's different. So,
Yeah,
that's something you should look into, I guess.
Yeah, I looked into it, and the only difference that I can see is that there's a prayer that's said. Blessed are you, Yehovah Elohim, who commanded us to circumcise our sons on the 8th day. Now, if you're at the doctor's office on the 8th day and they're circumcising your son, and you said yourself, blessed are you, Yehovah Elohim, who commanded us to circumcise our sons on the 8th day. Is that just as valid as a rabbi saying it, or a moil whose job it is to sharpen people's pencils? Who cares? I mean,
That's a good. I think that's a good point.
So yeah, as long as there's really no difference except for a prayer being offered. So that's an interesting side thing. But I want us to primarily be concerned about what we can actually do. And I think that all of us should have a circumcised heart. And I just think that if you are pursuing Yah with all of your heart and you want to observe his commands, then that's something you'll have to consider as a male. But I think we can be done with that conversation. It's certainly interesting though. There's also the idea of sacrificing an animal. We have known some people in the Hebrew Roots community who have decided that sacrificing an animal, or coming very, very close to actually sacrificing an animal, is something that they can do. I would say absolutely not. You're not going to get me near that with a 10-foot pole, because that is absolutely verboten. That is forbidden. So I am not going. And some people will not even eat eat lamb of any kind, because for one reason or another, they're going to say, well, I can't eat lamb of any kind. Make sure I don't eat lamb because I don't want it to be considered a Passover sacrifice. I don't think that you're in danger if you go to Costco and buy a leg of lamb, that you're in any danger of crossing over into the I made a sacrifice kind of thing. You're not. That's not really a consideration. But some people might, and I've heard some people say, well, Yeshua is our lamb. And if I eat lamb, I'm kind of saying that Yeshua is, it's like somehow Yeshua is not sufficient. I'm like, okay, I don't see it, but whatever, that's fine. Just a matter of, what your conscience is telling you. What the instructions are clear is that you are to do this observance. You are to not eat leavened bread. You should be circumcised physically or spiritually, however your interpretation of that is. You must not work on the first and the last day of this 7-day period. This is commanded that you not work. So if you can, you should have already put in for some time off. That is a commandment, if at all possible, unless you work in the emergency services field where you are saving people's lives or something. That's permissible. But anything else that you see regarding that before we kind of move into a little bit of stuff in the New Testament about, and some of the spiritual aspects about Yeshua and the Passover? Anything else that's on a practical level? Because I just want to make sure, and we're going to talk about some additional stuff next week. We'll get into some of the more deeper spiritual, mystical, even prophetic elements of the Passover. This is going to be like a little 2-part thing. But I wanted to just, as we're leading up to the Passover, just make sure that people are prepared on a practical level, because you'd be surprised about people who have been observing the Hebrew roots of the faith and are trying to be observant of the commands, are not actually removing the leaven from their homes for that 7-day period. They're still eating donuts and such, and they're not taking that time off of work for the first day and the last day. And so I just want to make sure that we're not, and I think that would be a good way to bring judgment on ourselves, to partake of the Passover in an unworthy manner, to regard the festivities of it, to regard the curiosity, but to not actually observe the commands that are specifically relevant to the Passover season, the Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread that lasts for 7 days. So I don't want anybody to be stumbling over that kind of stuff. Any questions, comments, or concerns in relation to that aspect of it, just the practical aspect of it? Who is it? It's Tracy Tim. Everybody, it's Tracy Tim.
I was just going to say the keeping of it, like you said, is crucial, because, I know people that say that these feasts are significant and important, but they don't keep them. And that's what makes our walk different. It's not just words. It's not hypocritical. It's doing it. And if it weren't for keeping this feast and inviting fellow believers to partake in it, they would never have experienced God in the way that they have. They realized how empty the holy days of the world are that are supposedly for Jesus. And So doing them, I just want to say, is extremely important.
100%. 100%. Good insight. Here, you can have this. Excellent insights, you guys. So I think that we can probably stop there. I hope that you got something out of this, but I want you to consider this week from this spiritual perspective, leaven, the idea of leaven. Okay, what'd you say? Oh,
We're unplugging the camera.
yeah, don't let her do that. So I would just like you to consider the idea, the spiritual implications of leaven. Remember that leaven is something that changes itself and infiltrates other things. The best way to look at this is that leaven, from our perspective, is an idea. And I think that an idea, a spiritual idea, it could be knowledge-based, but leaven is something that gets into your mind and it changes your mind regarding how you think about other things. And that's doctrine, is a good way to think about what leaven is. And so there are passages in the New Testament that speak about leaven. For example, in Matthew 13, it talks about how the kingdom of heaven is like leaven. In Matthew 16, the teaching of the Pharisees is kind of considered as leaven. In Luke 12, leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. You know, Paul is talking about being unleavened with sincerity and truth rather than having corrupt leaven of false ideas and not putting out of the congregation of the Corinthians people who are doing abominable things. So think about leaven spiritually for the next week, because when we get together, if we do, I presume we will, I'm hoping everybody will be healthy and strong and we'll get together physically next week. I'd like to talk about the spiritual aspects of leaven and also the prophetic aspects of the Passover and how Yeshua is the fulfillment of Passover. I want to talk about that in more depth. But do consider the spiritual aspects of leaven and what that means and how that works. Spiritual leaven. And frankly, the spiritual aspects of leaven that I would have you to examine this week are, leaven is most often associated with doctrine. What you think about what the Bible says. Notice that those are two different things. What you think about what the Bible says. Because the Bible says something, and here's what you think about it. What you think about it is often leavened. It is an idea that has been infiltrated by outside ideas that attach itself to a biblical concept or principle and turns it into something that it is not. It twists it in some way, it changes it. It gives you a different perspective, a different interpretation on what would be otherwise the pure word of Yah. The correct interpretation. You notice that Yah says that his people perish for a lack of knowledge. So knowing what the Bible actually says is really, really important. You know that I've mentioned this many times over the last decade, that it's so critical to me to help everybody understand, what does the Bible actually say? Because we have some weird ideas that we pick up from everywhere, whether it's YouTube videos, our parents, some Bible commentaries, even the Bible translation that we read can inject leaven into what otherwise was the pure Word of God. And we have to be very mindful of that. And so, you know, I hope you do, that what you think changes your behavior. How you think, the ways that you think, the things that you think about God and the way He does things and His people and who you are and who they are and what am I supposed to do and what am I supposed to not do. All of these ideas affect you dramatically. They really affect your walk, the way you talk, the way you interact with people. It changes everything. That is leaven. And so we need to be really looking at in our own lives what leaven do I have in my life that is impacting the way I see things, the way I see people, the way I see God, the way I see His plan, the way I see myself, the way I behave, the way I talk, the way I treat my wife, the way I treat my children, the way I treat my customers if I'm in business, the way I treat people who are serving me at the grocery store. The ideas about things are really, really powerful, and they shape everything. So leaven is a really powerful agent. And this period of 7 days at the beginning of every year, I want to make note to you that it is the tradition in Western cultures, and especially I know that many of you might have noticed that the Chinese New Year started here a little bit ago. It's like the year of the fire horse or whatever. And in American culture, we have the January 1st. But notice what the Bible said. The new year begins in the month of Aviv. And you know how I can tell that it's the month of Aviv? Because I walk down the sidewalks and I walk through my neighborhood on this beautiful walk with my wife, and all of the orange trees are in bloom and all of the flowers are coming back to life. It's coming out of winter and it's coming to life again. So when you see things start to bloom, now some of you back east may not be seeing that just yet, but remember that Israel and Egypt are desert countries, and I'm in Arizona, so I'm in a desert country. But when I see things exploding with growth, I know that the new year is here. And just like everything, spring cleaning, I think, is an idea that is akin to that, where we, at the beginning of the year, we examine ourselves to see if we're walking in an unworthy manner, to see if we're partaking of our Passover in a worthy manner, to see if we're walking according to the correct interpretation of the commands. We need to examine ourselves. It's the perfect time of year to do it. It's a time of renewal. It's a time of starting fresh. And so we have a 7-day period right there at the beginning of the year where it's time to examine our hearts. And of course, also that last year, and I think we're going to do it again this year, once Passover is over and we get to the Feast of First Fruits, which is the day that Yeshua was raised from the dead, our Christian friends call it Easter, we will have the beginning of the Omer count. And so for 50 days, 7 periods of 7 plus 1, we're going to come to Shavuot. And last year we got together every Sunday for a brief period in the morning to talk about some different aspect of working on that leaven, working on our own lives. Because I think you have to remember that, I think Halissa Alewine said this once, and I totally agreed with the way she characterized it, that on the 14th of the first month, you start your Passover, and then you have the Festival of Unleavened Bread, and then you have the first fruits of the resurrection with Yeshua, and then you got this 50-day period, and then you have Shavuot when the Torah was given from Mount Sinai. That's all one connected event. It's not this feast, and then we go through a period of dryness, and then there's that feast, and then nothing's going on, and then there's that feast. No, this is all connected. This starts it. This brings it to more fulfillment, this feast of Shavuot at the end of that 50-day period. These are all connected. And even the fall feasts are connected. It's all cyclical and it's all connected. So we don't want to treat it as 7 separate events. They're all connected. And so when we get together for the counting of the Omer, it's a wonderful thing. And I think it's a good idea to be examining ourselves and looking for internal growth for that whole 50-day period leading up to Shavuot when we are receiving the pure milk of the Word from Mount Sinai. It's a wonderful, wonderful shadow picture. So that's all I have for you for this evening. I want to say thank you for joining me. I apologize that we couldn't get together in person, but hopefully next week we will. I hope that you'll enjoy the remainder of your Shabbat with fellowship, with family and friends.